I'll just start with a brief introduction, then we'll let everybody sort of introduce themselves. So welcome everyone. This is the second Islamic Medical Association North America Guide to Matching for Ophthalmology Residency. Assalamu alaikum, peace to be with you. I want to thank IMANA for holding this webinar. This actually started as an idea last year. We had a very small sort of webinar at that time for anyone who could attend. It's not something specifically for Muslim applicants or for any type of applicant. It's for anyone who's applying, and it's a service that we appreciate that IMANA is hosting us for. If you haven't heard of IMANA as an organization, it's an organization that does really important work. In fact, they've been very busy the last weekend working on relief for floods in Pakistan, which obviously is a big issue and an important cause. So, I encourage you to check out their efforts on that. So I want to thank Akram Hashmi, their executive director, as well as Farooq Hussain, who helped organize this. So without further ado, we're very fortunate to have a very distinguished group here of educators and people who are, very understanding and involved in the residency application process. I consider myself really sort of privileged to be friends with you all, and so thank you for coming. I should note, everyone on this panel has spoken extensively about this issue, so residency and has a lot of experience with it. Dr. Rukhsana Mirza actually organized the AUPO webinar earlier this year that everyone should check out. AUPO has a fantastic list of resources that probably answers most questions, but this webinar is really focused on as a very timely step right before interviews. So giving for those who are applying for ophthalmology, giving tips for interviews and questions people may have about interviews, and then also, of course, supporting anybody else anywhere else in the process. And so we've had some questions come in early. Right, and so somebody's already asked a question. I think you guys could see the Q&A just like I can. I think I'll start general, and then we can go to those really nitty-gritty questions, which I think are really interesting. And so I'll kind of act as moderator here, and anybody who feels comfortable sort of pick up the baton and go from there. So I'm Osamah Saeedi. I'm very involved with admissions and vice chair at University of Maryland.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm Misha Syed. I am a recently retired program director for ophthalmology, but I'm now more in the undergraduate medical education space as an assistant dean for clinical education at University of Texas Medical Branch. But residency recruitment is still near and dear to my heart. I'm still very involved in my department, and along with Dr. Mian and Dr. Mirza, we have years of kind of collective experience with this, and we've also traversed the virtual landscape, which is challenging to say the least. So
I'm Rukhsana Mirza. I am the director of undergraduate medical education at Northwestern University.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Shahzad Mian. I'm at University of Michigan. I am a recovering residency program director. I didn't know, Misha, you had joined the club of recovering program directors. I served as residency program director and at Michigan for 15 years, and I stopped about 3 years ago, and now I'm the vice chair for clinical sciences and learning in the department, which is sort of the clinical operations and a lead education role in the department.
So, the focus of this is applying for ophthalmology and ophthalmology interviews. So I'll just sort of ask an open-ended interview question. So applicants at this point in the process, what should they be doing to prepare for interviews? What tips would you give for them as they prepare to go on the interview trail virtually?
I'll start out. I think everyone should have their application in. If you don't have your application in, that's definitely something that I would urgently do. The applications became live to the programs on September 1st. The next step, I would say, and we mentioned this in the AUPO webinar too, is just really kind of crystallize your journey and what you want to talk about at your interviews. Really, I would say one thing that I tell my students to do is to really kind of point out, maybe almost make note cards of things that are really critical to who they are and experiences that they've had. If they've had publications, how they would explain that to a layman, how they would explain it very technically, how they would explain it to a patient or to another student, and really practice those points. In the virtual environment, it becomes really critical to be able to connect with individuals and to have that idea of what you want to really relay is important, I would say.
I would sort of just add to that and say that don't forget the basics. Make sure you practice in advance and do mock interviews with faculty in your own department. It is not natural to sit at Zoom and spend 15 minutes to really be sharing the best of you. So it's important to practice. Also, the basics include making sure you have you don't stand out for all the wrong reasons. Even though it's on Zoom, you need the neutral background. You need to make sure you're dressed professionally. You need to make sure you are in a spot where you're comfortable, that you're not going to sweat during the interview or you're not too cold in the interview. You just want to make sure that you're comfortable, but make sure that you're, we've had people who they're rocking their chair the entire time in the interview, and it's really distracting. And unfortunately, somebody will hold that against you and ding you for something little like that, even if you have important things to say, because they won't even hear what you have to say because they're distracted. So the basics are really important when setting up the stage for, especially on Zoom.
Yeah, I can add what I think has been really helpful at our institution. Please definitely take heed of what they've told you. And what I was going to mention is at UTMB, and you can find out if your institutions do this, but we actually have mock interviews set up, faculty who volunteer. And so I just did that a few weeks ago with some of our students. And so I did a series of students in a row, and it was amazing to me, the variation in, simple things like Dr. Mian was saying, background, fidgeting, some people were looking like up while they were talking, which is kind of a natural thing to do because you feel like you're staring at a weird screen. So why not look away and talk? And somehow that's more comfortable, but it does not come across well. So you got to practice those things because you don't even know that you're doing it. Unless someone tells you. So if you have those mock interview opportunities through your school, please take advantage of it. And if not, like Dr. Mian was saying, ask faculty to practice with you, set up something, even do it with your family and friends. I was telling the people that I counseled, I'm like, don't let this be your only practice. Run through it with someone on the other side so you learn what to look, where to look, and how to engage with the person on the screen.
You can actually even in Zoom videotape yourself and watch yourself and see how everything comes across. When you're speaking, very easy to be nervous, but when you are able to kind of review, you'll see what we're talking about.
I think that's really good advice. It's funny, they have actually really good advice on the AUP website. One of them, I just reviewed it, was if you wear glasses, the reflection may come out and that may be distracting. And I'm looking at my glasses and they're very distracting. So I think one of the things is to consider using contact lenses in that situation. We actually have a bunch of questions. So while I had other questions, I think we can actually just go directly to the questions because we do have limited time. So I'll just read the first one. How many research publications should we aim for? What is the bare minimum? Do non-ophtho publications count?
I don't think there's any magic answer to this other than to say that it is helpful to have publications. It is not a requirement, but it is helpful to have publications no matter what area you're publishing in. The main advantage of having ophthy publications is that it gives you just something to talk about that the people interviewing you know more about. And if you have a lot of non-ophthalmology publications, you're gonna get lots of credit for it, but people will be intimidated to ask you questions about them.
I would add to that, you'll also need to explain why you have those publications, right? So I would say the way that I see research, if people have a bunch of research, but they have never completed anything, that to me seems like, notable. I would say what's going on with that. But if you've done a lot of research and you complete it, you present it, you those are really positive things that show that you're committed and that you you have an inquisitive nature and you're a good team player, right? Because you're completing projects. You should have that as part of your journey as to why you did all those and how did that kind of lead you to ophthalmology. You should be able to speak about that. But I agree, there isn't a critical number. I think the way that we look at it is, what was your participation in that research, and can you speak about it?
I would want to add one thing on the research side. I also am very heavily involved in research myself. I think there's sort of a couple of caveats I would say, is that some applicants think it's just about getting a number of research projects. So they'll have like 20 research projects on there. And then the question really is, did you really do this all? Like, let me ask about number 17 on the list. And sometimes I can't answer it. So, know your application inside out, don't do things just to do it. I really think research is beneficial. I think there's like top tier academic programs where there's a certain number of publications that maybe some faculty are interested in. But there's a lot of clinical programs and sort of mid-tier programs where I think research is a way to connect with your interviewer. Like, they may not know about you. They may have a totally different background from you, but at least they can connect with the research and show that you knew your stuff, you knew what you're doing. And it's like sort of a way to break the ice sometimes. So I think that's a benefit of research. And then the thing is, just everyone else has at least some research, so you might as well have something as well. In general, that's my thought on that. We have one. The next question here from another attendee here is, what do you think of an Islamic focused application? For example, faith-based research and activities. So this is an interesting question. I'm interested to see what the panel has to say.
I can start on this one. So I think it goes back to what we've already been talking about, which is you want to be able to show what you're interested in, what you're passionate about. You want to show in-depth involvement in your activities, not just a laundry list of, I'm a member of these 10 organizations, but what have you done in those organizations? Organizations. How have you made yourself prominent, a leader in whatever capacity, somehow making strong effort. And I think that falls into Islamic focused activities as well. I don't think people should shy away from that. If that's a big part of who you are, then you can present it in that way. And, there's lots of people who present their own faith-based activities at, Christian and Jewish organizations and things. And I think, commitment to something is commitment to something. So if you're comfortable with it and that's something that's important to you, then I don't think there's a problem.
I would add, I think, just as with anything in your application, to make it relatable to your audience and, have some connection with the audience, not just, present it, but how does that make you a great resident? How is that going to make you a great ophthalmologist? How is that going, have some context with which that actually makes you even a stronger applicant. And that's with any part of your application. Again, it's bringing your most authentic self. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to add than to say that, there's a big emphasis on you being yourself and showcasing what your strengths are. And clearly your faith will be one of your biggest strengths. So it's important to make sure you don't shy away from who you are as a person in the application. Having said that, I would echo what Rukhsana is saying, that it is important for it not to be just about that I'm Muslim and I practice this or I do this, but it's really about relating to people. Relating to anybody who respects faith-based approach to doing things. And so generalizing it in terms of a conclusion or a lesson is important, and perhaps maybe helpful in terms of how you portray things as well, rather than being just focused on, although you are a Muslim and you're practicing, but you can relate to people through their interest in their faith and how they would learn from any project you've done, or relating to you as a person.
And
I-
tying in, sorry, I was just gonna, that
Yeah.
reminded me when Shahzad was talking about, tying it into community service. A lot of times the faith-based organizations are heavily involved in that. So that's a really nice tie-in, showing how you're serving your community through those faith-based activities organizations.
I think these are all really good points. And I really definitely like the point made about sort of making it relatable. Oftentimes, just the nature, I think, of life and even of modern life, that we're sort of in our own little cocoon. We may not necessarily have experiences that we know how to relate to everyone. So I think testing out both your application and some of your interview stuff to a sort of a diverse group would be helpful, if you have any question about that.
Maybe I can flip this for the panel, and I don't know if anybody wants to answer this, because the question that I get asked often is that, is there going to be bias against me because I'm openly talking about myself as being Muslim in the application process? Do you guys think that there's bias built in the process if you are openly talking about yourself as Muslim in the application?
So my name is fairly obviously Muslim, and I interviewed not long, about 15 years ago. So some things you can't really run away from, but I think that I do worry that there's some bias. There's a wide variety of people on admissions committees. I went to a residency where it's sort of more of a closed door type thing, and things are probably said behind closed doors that might not have been as politically correct. I think that's why I say sort of like audience testing certain ideas is good. I aspire to live in a world where you can be who you are and everyone appreciates that. But I think I recognize that we all have our own biases and experiences. And, it's important to be able to relate to everybody. So if you're sort of talking about a very narrow experience, about, the specific, if you're talking about, let's say, some sort of specific devotional songs of a specific sect, of a specific something that you find very interesting, that might be very unusual to, even somebody who's, somewhat familiar with that. And I've seen this, I do get a lot of, because I run a research fellowship, so I do get a lot of people who haven't matched who sort of come to me after the match. And sometimes I'll see people who, I think it's good to be proud of who you are and certainly represent yourself. But again, I just think the generalizability of the experience is really important, even to get your foot in the door in such a competitive environment.
Yeah, I would. Biases are inherent, right? I'm sure there are biases, but there are biases against many things. I think that there's, in medicine as a whole, and ophthalmology specifically, I think that we are, striving towards, diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that that's on the top of everyone's mind. Having said that, you still want to make a residency class that's cohesive and this is a job interview. And I would just go back to the points I said before. How is this going to make you a great resident? How is this going to make you a great co-resident? How are you going to fit in to this? And that doesn't mean that you have to be like everyone else, but I would focus on the interview being, what are you bringing to the table, and how does your faith maybe accentuate that? But again, this is a forum for a lot of different ideas and a lot of different aspects of your application. And I would really, bring all of that to the table as well.
We have the next questions. What questions do you recommend we ask to get a feel for the culture of a program, especially with the interviews being virtual?
Since it's quiet, I'll start by saying that I think it's really important to have some time with the residents in the program and to ask them directly about how happy they are, if they feel that the learning environment is supportive of them in terms of the resources that they have, the time that they have to be able to learn, the exposure they have to clinical and surgical skills, all of those questions, but asking. And in a setting where you have sort of the one-on-one or group time with residents alone, in general, I do feel that residents will be far more honest and direct with you about how they're feeling, whether it's good or bad. So you'll get to hear it. And I think that will give you a much better assessment of the culture.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I'd be weary of a program, especially virtually. It's so much harder to interact. It's not the same as we had with in-person interviews where you could, chat with the residents while you were getting a tour of the campus or throughout the day having lunch or whatever. So, look for the programs that have made it made as much time available as possible in a limited virtual interview to talk to the residents. Especially those programs maybe that have like the evening before virtual Zoom reception or whatever, make sure you're going to those, A, and B, if they don't have that, make sure during the interview day that they have some time set aside where you can chat with residents from all the different years, especially. I think that definitely is going to give you a better idea than viewing a PowerPoint, discussing the curriculum. I mean, that those kind of things are important too. But if you're worried about really understanding the culture and kind of seeing if the residents are feeling happy and fulfilled, I mean, that's a gestalt. That's not something that is really granular and something you can find on a website or something. So definitely try to seek that out. If you're not getting those opportunities, ask, and say, hey, is there any way we can talk to the residents? Maybe they'll share email addresses or something, but really be mindful of how many of the programs where you're interviewing, who does give enough time for that and who doesn't, because that also can be an indication of what kind of culture a program has. And to me, that's one of the most important things about the interview process is giving enough time for the applicants to meet the residents.
I guess I would add, you could also assess like from the variety of attendings who are involved in the interview process. Are there, how dedicated are the attendings to, recruitment and to the program? That would be just another aspect. Of course, the residents are the key element, and in live interviews, we always used to be telling people, if you never see the residents, that's a problem. Like you have to be able to see them. So for sure, you'll get a lot from them. But I think it's the interactions between residents and attendings that's sometimes really telling, how do they speak with each other? What kind of events may they have together? You can tell a lot from websites as well, so those are just different virtual aspects of trying to figure that out. It is challenging.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the websites are useful. Social media is sometimes useful. Some programs are really good on social media. Some are not, and on all the different platforms. But obviously, beware of what you hear from one source. It's not always accurate. That's the other side of that. We have actually 8 questions. So the next one from Aziza Delai is, how heavily do you think Altis will be considered? I think maybe Rukhsana is the one with the most experience on this. I don't know.
I'm actually not. Misha is the most, but
okay.
Go ahead, Rukhsana, if you want. I can add it after you talk. Mm-hmm.
I think it's TBD to this year, but that's my
yeah. I mean, the thing is that it really is something that programs are going to use to varying degrees, is the short answer. So there's really not a clear prescription for how much programs are going to look at it. It's really going to depend on how valuable the program feels that data is. So the best advice is just do the best you can. As we were talking about, be as authentic as you can to, when you're presenting yourself on those different assessments. They're going to use that when you're talking about culture. You're using, as much as you're trying to find the culture of a program, they're also trying to find residents that are going to be, similar to the makeup of their program in terms of mindset and, and the different things that Altis is picking out. I hate to use that word fit. We're kind of supposed to stay away from that, but that essentially is, how well are you going to mesh in that program is an important question. And how well is that program going to mesh with you? It's two sides. So Altis potentially is giving information that's more objective in that area. So just do the best you can to answer those questions truthfully and accurately.
I get the impression, and I know very little about Altis other than that we're going to be doing it, and we're in a study now to be doing it. I think probably the best advice is that it's like anything else in an application. Either no, it may not be looked at, but it may be scrutinized, and so you have to do your best, as Dr. Syed said. Okay, so next question. I don't know how answerable this is, but I'll answer the question. So it says, which programs have a reputation of having strong Muslim community and support for their Muslim residents? This is a difficult question to answer. I would hope that there are no programs that they're the opposite. I guess you could go that way in terms of, but I think if you have a concern about that, certainly if there are Muslim residents in that program, you could certainly ask them if there are people in that medical center. But otherwise, I think it's a fairly difficult question to answer, but I'll defer to the other panelists.
I don't know that I've ever really heard it discussed. I don't think it even comes up really in terms of, I don't know. I mean, we've had plenty of Muslim residents over the years, plenty of non-Muslim residents, but I don't know, maybe amongst themselves, residents may talk about that, but I'm not privy to that being, it's hard to have that as a definitive part of a program because, we're supposed to be non-faith-based, I mean, this is a educational process, and we're not, while there are a lot of organizations in the community and everything, and I mean, probably most communities within a city where a residency is will have these things. I don't know that we can say that it's built into a residency itself. So maybe the way to look at it is which cities that you're interested in have strong, Muslim communities and organizations and things that you can plug into.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that too. There's certainly, in large cities, many communities to connect to. And I think I would look at truly any residency that values its residents is going to value, what is going to support them. So I don't know of any specific programs where it is primarily Muslim or Muslim support, but if you just look here on this Zoom call, all four of us are in leadership positions at our institutions, and certainly that is important. And when you look at the leadership of the programs, that might be helpful. Looking at the resident composition, certainly that changes year to year, but that might be helpful as well.
I agree with all that, but I think that it's really the students who drive that aspect of it. But what I mean by that is that it's, just like with every other minority group, you seek yourself in a program. And if there are residents, they tend to, that is definitely becomes often a positive factor for people choosing to go to a program. So that is, of course, going to be there. But it changes. It's a small number. All of us there are no big ophthalmology programs. So, for example, in our residency program, we have 7 a year, and we've essentially had one person in every class the last 4 years, which is the first time that ever happened in my 20 years being here. And I would give a lot of credit to the person who was in the lead end of it, somebody who just graduated about a year ago from our program. She's the most dynamic, most amazing person. Everybody's attracted to her personality and her and so obviously, and she wears hijab, and she was very open about who she is as a person. And that attracts people to come to the program because they see a leader regardless of their faith. And yet, yes, she is proud to be who she is. And so I think that is often what it takes. So once you're in a residency program, be yourself, continue to attract people to the program with your personalities. I think that is what builds the community more than anything else. It's hard for us to control it. You guys get to control that more than we do.
Great advice. So next one is, what parts of the application are typically most important for programs when they're considering offering an interview? So I think it varies. I guess I'll take it. I think I'll answer it quickly. I think so. It varies. It varies by program. It varies by screener. It varies by interviewer. There's some things that everyone will tell you that they're, the good thing, I think it's a good thing that USMLE Step 1 is de-emphasized now. I thought that it was becoming less and less meaningful on its own, and it has its problems anyway. I can say some people will say that your third year grades are very important, that, how you perform in your clerkships are very important because that's sort of the most simulated residency experience that you'll have. And then it varies so much. Some people will really look at the personal statement and will really look at your sort of what you want to do. I think the various answers to the questions there, and other people will just skim over it because the reality is every program has different ways of doing it, but everyone's getting about 600 applications for however many spots they have, or more, right? So I don't know if I answered that question right, but I think somebody else will answer it better than me after this. So I will defer to somebody else.
I think you're right. I think there's no good answer. Maybe, like you said, after me, maybe Rukhsana or Shahzad will have more info, but it's really, I think objective measures are really what kind of, at least historically, get your foot in the door. And then it's up to you to sell the rest, like we've been talking about, showing yourself as a person. Some of that can come out on paper, but a lot of that's going to come out once you get an interview. Because step 1 is now not numerically scored, step 2 CK is going to be more important. That's just all there is to it. Chances are that's going to go away in a few years. But for the time being, that's another, number. Grades like Dr. Saeedi mentioned, grades are going to be more important. The MISPE, the Medical Student Performance Evaluation, is now probably going to hold more relative importance in that initial screening, especially as they've gotten more granular. And, a lot of schools will show kind of where you're falling on a quartile or a quintile system. And that helps us gauge, because grades otherwise are quite subjective, to be honest, from institution to institution. But if we can see where you're falling with your peers at the institution, that's somewhat of a gauge of your clinical performance. So for what it's worth, I mean, I wish there was some magic formula. It's just, it's you got to do well on those things. You got to show that you'll be a strong team player. That's really important. You're going to be a hard worker. Things in your application that show that, which usually is performing well in your clerkships, getting strong letters, all those things are going to indicate, is this going to be a person that our faculty and your fellow residents and our staff are going to enjoy working with every day.
Yeah, I guess Misha just touched upon that. I find that the letters of recommendation seem to be very important. Obviously the rest of your application is who you are. All of that is important, right? There's no way of doing an application without your grades, and there's no way of doing an application without your personal statement or your activities, or, so to say like, is one more important than the other? That's the whole picture. And now that part is done, hopefully, for most of you. So I would just know that application really well and go forward.
Just one other thing in understanding how interviews are offered, because that was the question, was more about how they're offered. Obviously, it's your academic record, which will go back to the research publications as well. But geography does matter. Where you go to medical school does matter in this process. Unfortunately, programs do look at where they've gotten residents from before and use that as a marker of who they're going to get in the future as well. So if we get hardly any residents from California, we may not want to spend inviting all the amazing applicants from California, because we could fill up all our 60 slots with California applicants. So there's that geography may change the so you may not get an interview or get an interview based on where you go to medical school. So there are regional biases for sure in most programs, and certainly from where they've had residents in the past.
Dr. Syed, I think I had a hand up.
Yeah, that's such a great point you made. And I didn't think to bring that up, Dr. Mian, but actually a really good place where you can say, let's say you're from California, but you have big personal reasons to end up in Texas. You can create a standardized, or you can, I'm sorry, not a standardized, non-standardized essay question, now you can pick several of those questions. You can put that information in there. You can explain kind of my extended family lives there, or I grew up there and as a child, now I'm living in this state, but, I'd like to get back there. And those are the things that are going to be, making you much more interesting to programs that otherwise may not look at you because they figure, oh, they're not going to really want to come here.
I would just caution, I think that personalizing the statement is really important. I think that you just have to really, again, be very careful because, we've received a number of applications that, I'm really interested in being in like New York. Like, well, we're in Maryland, we're not really in New York, or like the Southeast, like we're not really in the Southeast. Like I think our basketball team's in the Southeast division, but we're not really in the Southeast in Baltimore. So,
you have to make the effort to write like 5 different letters if you're really trying to target all those regions, and make sure you put the right, or essays, I keep saying letters, but put those essays to the correct programs for sure, because that'll look disingenuous if you.
Yeah, I mean, that is just something you're not going to look at, frankly. Okay, so I'm going to try to group questions because we have just 20 minutes left. So there are 2 questions about DO applicants and 1 question about IM and 2 questions about IMGs. I'm just going to read them all out and then we can sort of answer them. And they're 2 different groups of applicants, but they're maybe not sort of allopathic applicants that we otherwise see. So what advice, if any, do you feel that all DO applicants should know when applying to ophthalmology? And then sort of another question regarding DO applicants is, thank you for being out there and sharing your wisdom. What advice do you have for DO re-applicants who are not able to do formal away rotations? I guess let's do that and then we'll do the international graduate question after that. So why don't we do the DO question first?
I guess I would just say maybe have something prepared about your medical school. I mean, I think sometimes it's just like an unfamiliarity with a certain program, so be able to talk about your experiences. And I think that would be like the most critical part, where I've seen, an interviewer may not know as much about the program or about that school, and again, relating that experience.
Just to be, I think, fair and honest about it, I think that certainly is a barrier that you have to overcome when you are reapplying. And to some extent, being a DO applicant as well, because the majority of programs are at this point still MD programs, although they are merged and they're the same programs, but there are very few DO programs, mostly they're MD programs. And that bias exists exactly like Rukhsana said, because there's a lack of familiarity with students who are in those, who come into the MD program. So therefore, the program, again, does not want to take a chance on somebody who may not do well, even though they don't know that. So unfortunately, you have to overcome that by doing away rotations if you can. You have to, obviously, if you're reapplying, you're going to have to spend time doing things that help you stand out. So whether it's working with Dr. Saeedi on research or you're doing a clinical training program that allows you to show that you are a strong clinician and you can work with the best of them, and getting those letters from those people who get to know you to help address those concerns that are there in the programs, whether it's, the concerns are, is this person going to be able to fit into our program? Are they going to be able to thrive in our program? Are they going to be able to manage the workload in our program? So if those questions can be answered, that would really help make your application stronger.
So there's some questions about international graduates. So I think there's 2 of them. I'll ask them back to back. So one is, what do you look for in the application of an international medical graduate? Thought I saw another one in here. The other one is, what's the scope of an IMG getting into ophthalmology residency? What would stand out or matter in their application?
Yeah, it's tough. Like Dr. Mian was saying, the problem is that the unfamiliarity, I think, it comes back to that. People aren't aware of a lot of the universities, the medical colleges in other countries. That makes it inherently challenging because they don't have a frame of reference. So trying to provide that frame of reference as best you can. Sometimes your international school can provide some kind of comparison, of the curriculum or somehow show, how there's an somewhat equivalent training. I think that kind of documentation can be helpful. Obviously, standardized scores are helpful because those are the same tests for people who are IMGs or not. Now, with step 1 going away, I think step 2 would be even more important for an international graduate, for a DO graduate as well. You've got to use those things that could be to your advantage, perform as well as you can on those objective measures. Letters, it's already been mentioned, maybe if you have particular institutions you're really targeting where you might want to go, see if you can do even observerships. You may not be able to clinically work there, but you've got to get to know the people in that department and you, and to kind of see, the type of person you are. That's something that will maybe help beyond, what's on paper.
Yeah, the international graduates that I've known that have been very successful have done multi-year research for a few reasons. 1, to do research. 2, to familiarize yourself with the US system. 3, to get letters to show that you're able to work well in a team, you're able to navigate, the US hospitals, and people have been incredibly successful by doing so.
I just have one thing to add to everything. So in the list of resources on AUPO, there are a couple of articles. One is success in matching among US graduates. The other is success in matching among international graduates. This is Ayman Nasseri's group, and I forget the other authors, so forgive me. But the one thing that was most predictive was having 3 ophthalmology letters. So I think what that speaks to for international graduates is having an advocate or advocates, because those of us in the position where we're on committees and that sort of thing, we get many emails from other people around the country saying so-and-so is good, do you have an interview spot? And it's sort of a strange system, I guess, but when somebody else is vouching for you, another faculty member is vouching for you, especially if you're from a lesser known institute, be it IMG or DO or an allopathic school that doesn't have an ophthalmology program or something like that, try to sort of seek out those advocates that will strongly support you. I think that's probably the best way to do it, just from my limited experience.
One simplistic thing I'll just add is that you really have to be passionate. You have to show the energy. You have to do this. I'm sure you are, but it needs to be displayed very actively. People need to see this in everything that you do, whether it's research or clinical work. You have to put yourself out there to be successful. And in my experience, the closer you are to the end of your schooling outside the US, the stronger applicant you're going to be. The further out you get, the harder it gets. So remember that you do have time. It's not a 1 year or 2 year thing, but you don't have forever. Don't wait and sit on, I'm going to apply in 5 years from now, because that may by itself hurt you in the process. So have a plan, have a vision, execute it, be passionate.
So there's a number of other questions. I'm going to kind of pick the ones I think are most relevant. So there's one question that says, are letters of interest intent a good idea if you want to go somewhere specific? So I think this is piggybacking on what Dr. Syed was saying. But I guess this is separate, like maybe sending a separate email or something like that. And if so, what are your thoughts on sending them before interview invitations go out? So I think this is a situation, and we've all gotten emails, sort of even a barrage of emails, depending, probably the program directors amongst us have, people showing specific interest. Like, how do you weigh that? What do you think about that? Is there something that might stick out to you?
To be honest, as Dr. Mian said, a recently recovering program director and managing the flood in our inbox every day, I'm sure all of you guys have that, not only from colleagues who are mentioning applicants, but getting things from applicants themselves. I think unless it's something really, I don't even want to say that it's something, amazing and that you didn't already put in your application. Sometimes, applicants have gotten first authorship on a paper published in ophthalmology or something, and they may want to send that and say, by the way, I just want you to know, this is something that I wasn't able to put in my application, but actually SF Match does allow you to go in, and then we get the notifications when you add things too. So I don't know that there's really a situation where you'd want to, because it almost runs the risk of again, not that we don't want to see those things, but there's a time and a place. And I feel like people's email inboxes are just becoming so hard to manage that getting more things that way can be very frustrating, not specifically to the people who send it, but it just is overwhelming. Maybe sending things, if you want to do something like that, sending information to the program coordinator, and then the coordinator can kind of filter it and show it to, selection committee members or whatever in a more kind of filtered way. That's maybe a good way to go. But always make sure that you're being as, polite, respectful, non-intrusive as possible, because sometimes it can come across as like bull in a china shop. Sometimes it can be a bit much. So you want to gauge, how much work are you putting on someone else, at the end, on the other end. Because that's something to be really mindful of. Like we were mentioning, we have, potentially over 600 applications to go through. So adding another document to that, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to hear what my co-presenters would say about this, but that's my personal feeling on it. Just be mindful of that.
I would say that it matters and it's helpful to do at the end. So when you're submitting your rank list, it helps you to tell the program that you're ranking number one. I would not lie about it. I would only tell one program that they're number one on your match list. And it helps to have your closest mentors email that program, the people that they know the program, the chair or the program director or somebody who's involved in the selection process, to say that you're ranking them number one. That does help.
But at the front end, like you're saying, it's probably not helpful.
Not so helpful in the front end, definitely helpful on the back end, because if you're in that, in between zone, you may get moved up a few slots, which may help you match there if that's where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think like a letter of intent at the beginning. I mean, before the interviews go out, if there is a place you really are, that is where your significant other is going to be, or your family is, or something that's not in your application, then that may be something that you can come forward. Like, I am very interested in being in this location and really look forward to an interview. That might be valuable, but to do it just as a pan, like without any specific information, I think that most of that is just overlooked prior to interviews going out. That's what I would say.
I think we have time for one more question. I just looked through them. There's one that has a thumbs up, so I'll take that as a vote of confidence for the question. How have Muslim residents in your program navigated taking time off on Friday for Jummah prayer? As an applicant, is there any way to gauge how supportive programs will be in this regard? So this is a common issue, a common problem. I'll tell you my own experience when I found my program to be very supportive, but only after I sort of explained it. And there was even one clinic when I was in Fort Worth, I had to leave for like 30 or 40 minutes, which actually was quite hard in my situation, but my co-residents were able to help. And it was good to sort of make friends and have friends in that regard. But it's not always easy, especially if you're sort of having to go off-site. At bigger programs where there's a Friday congregational prayer in the hospital, it's way, way easier. And I remember a few years ago, one year we had 3 Muslim residents in the same class, and they had this question, what are we gonna do for Jummah? Like, this hospital doesn't have it. I said, look, we have to be creative here. Like, there's 3 of you, like, why don't you make your own Jummah? And, that counts in whatever, like in certain ideologies or schools of thought or whatever. And why don't we just do that? Like, why don't you organize that and have all the other Muslim residents in the hospital come and do that? Because we have to kind of make this work and not disrupt, rotations that aren't really set up for that. So I think it's a little give and take. Like, I mean, I think you can make it work. And I think the 2 things that I would say is, it's hard to know beforehand. You'll know beforehand by other Muslim residents who've gone through. But in any situation, and this is for like any time you're facing this religious accommodation issue for any employer, frankly, you just have to have sort of good communication with your program director, and also really good relationship with your co-residents, because they're going to help you, and you need to cover for them sometimes as well. Maybe that was comprehensive. All right.
I think that there were a couple of people who asked about and I hear this question quite a bit about the Aris applications this
Right.
month. That's seems to be a frequent question, and I think that the Aris applications probably do need to go in, but you need to ask specifically about the programs who are not participating in SF Match, because I think that they may be handled differently. I think that's the answer to that question. Would you guys add anything to that?
The general breakdown is that if it's a joint program, you have to go through Aris because it's a separate application process. For example, in Michigan, we have a joint program with our internal medicine program. So you have to apply separately for medicine, even though you're going to be guaranteed getting a spot. Versus integrated programs, it's all through SF Match.
No, but I think the question is, can they wait until after the match to submit? And what I was saying is, I think that the application should go in. Your program, do you the timing of when the application goes in?
Yes, it has to go in advance. You can't wait till the match comes out, because by then it's too late. Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
So thank you for choosing that, because there are a couple of questions on that. There was one question about the Zoom, and I think Zoom questions are apt. So earlier we discussed how not to be distracting on Zoom, don't look up, don't rock back and forth, etc. Could you talk about how to keep the interviewer engaged, given they may be interviewing back to back, have Zoom fatigue? So the interviewer is fatigued. You know, maybe it's the second day of a long day of interviews. Maybe you're number 60 out of 60. You know, what advice would you give this applicant?
I mean, I think just trying to connect with your interviewer. I find that's the most valuable thing. People are tired, but when you have a conversation with someone and if you can connect with them, that usually is more memorable.
I would say one thing I found helpful, we all like to talk about ourselves. And so when I have applicants ask me, you know, what's the reason you're at UTMB, or what's your favorite thing about, you know, about being in this department on this campus, and then you'll find out a lot about the program, right? You're going to hear about those kind of things that you're wondering about, culture, you know, kind of the intangibles. I think you'll get a lot of interesting answers, and people are going to just naturally be engaged if you're asking them personal stuff. I mean, don't make the whole interview about that, but I think that's a good way to kind of still have a good back and forth, like Dr. Mirza was saying. You know, it almost always leads to a good conversation.
But we'll do one last one, and then we'll finish. And okay, so here's one from an MS2. So I'm an MS2 non-US IMG. How to go about your CV from now onwards if I'm interested in ophthalmology? So I think this is a good question for not people who are, you know, currently in the thick of things and applying, but like sort of people who are more junior, either international graduates in this case, or, you know, domestic graduates. What advice would you give for somebody saying, hey, I'm really interested in ophthalmology, what should I do now?
I think people have kind of touched on it, you know, trying to get some meaningful research, a project completed, several, maybe one or two at least, you know, start to finish, something presented or published, disseminated in some way is important. Making those ties with departments that are near you. I don't know if this person has a home ophthalmology department, or it was kind of unclear. I'm not sure. They're MS2s, but they're in an IMG school. Is that correct?
Looks like non-US international medical graduate. So it sounds like they're at I mean, I guess that.
I guess if they're an MS2, they shouldn't be a graduate though. Maybe just a student, maybe just a foreign student.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
international student, I guess. Right.
Yeah. So, you know, if they have ophthalmology faculty that they can reach out to where they are, I think that's important. You know, sometimes those ophthalmology is still a relatively small world, even internationally. So they may have ties to faculty who are at US programs. You know, that sometimes is a good way to get connected. Trying to, again, rotate, have your face there. If there's any way to do that during your medical school career, I think that might help, because you'll be personally known, at least if you can go to an institution or two. I mean, I don't know if that'll be an option, but that can be helpful.
I think even just attending like grand rounds and events within the department. You get to, even without a formal rotation, you get to meet people through the events that the department may put on. And that may be another informal way.
Great idea. And if you're international, a lot of them are virtual now, so you can ask to attend even virtually.
Great. So I want to thank all the panelists for taking time out. It's 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and I recently found out that Ann Arbor is on East Coast time. Shahzad educated me on that. So it's a little late for us, but it's late in general. The applicants have asked that we put our emails in the chat. So if any of you are comfortable doing that, I'll go ahead and do that for myself. Also, just FYI, Islamic Medical Association is going to have a dinner at 6:30 at Academy. So that'll be October 1st at the Hyatt McCormick. And so we're hoping to have sort of a lot of people, good for networking, and our speaker will be Shahzad Mia. So come out for that.
I think the chat is not visible to them. I'm not
Okay.
sure about that. So maybe
How can we share our contact information?
maybe you can send that out to all the people who registered.
I think we should just do that. Yeah. So because it's like a lengthy sort of link, and we're gonna put it out in social media as well. So if you found out about this through social media or from friends, you'll also find out through that. I just put it on. There's a WhatsApp group, IMANA group. So I'll also there's a couple of tweaks on the flyer, but I'll send it out shortly. Great. Well, this is great. Thank you all for attending this. Thank you, IMANA, for sponsoring this, and hope to see many of you at Academy. And have a great night.